My brother tossed his beer can and grinned, ready to twist the knife. At our family BBQ in Grand Rapids, he leaned in, voice dripping with mockery. "So Chelsea, where's your husband and kids?" "Oh right, you don't have any." My mom and dad chuckled, their laughter slicing deeper than his words. "I'm Chelsea Irwin, 32, a marketing specialist who moved back to my parents' house after a divorce. I'd been bankrolling their lives, but that night something snapped. I locked eyes with my brother and fired back. "Where's your money?" "Oh wait, I've been paying for you all. But that ends today." The table froze. My mom's fork clattered. My dad's smirk vanished. Silence choked the air, heavy with shock and something else, fear. They'd underestimated me, thinking I'd swallow their jabs like always. But I was done being their punching bag. That moment wasn't just a comeback. It was the spark of a fire I didn't know I'd ignite. I'd spent years keeping this family afloat only to be mocked for my broken marriage. What they didn't know was how far their betrayal ran, or what I'd uncover next. That BBQ wasn't just a fight, it was the beginning of my rebellion. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by your own family? Drop your story in the comments. After that BBQ, the house felt smaller, like the walls were closing in on me. Living with my parents in Grand Rapids wasn't just about sharing space, it was a daily test of endurance. The rental house, a cramped 2-story with peeling paint, held 4 adults with clashing egos. I paid the bills, the groceries, and the endless medical costs, funneling $60,000 into this sinking ship. Yet somehow I was the one they saw as broken, the divorced daughter who couldn't keep a man. My mother, Janet Blair, a retired bank teller, leaned heavily on me. Her diabetes drained her energy and our savings, with doctor visits and insulin stacking up like unpaid debts. She'd sigh over coffee, murmuring about my poor choices as if my ex-husband's exit was my fault. Her words stung, but she'd soften them with a pat on my hand, making it harder to call out her hypocrisy. My father, Edward Irwin, was no better. A former factory manager turned failed entrepreneur, he'd burned through his savings chasing get-rich schemes. Now he sat in his recliner, scrolling stock apps, offering unsolicited advice on my career, while contributing nothing but complaints. His silence when I needed support spoke louder than any lecture. Then there was Scott Blair, my 28-year-old brother, a self-proclaimed musician who hadn't booked a gig in years. He lounged in the basement, strumming chords and preaching about following dreams while I covered his phone bill and car insurance. His jabs about my divorce were relentless, tossed out like casual barbs over dinner. "Guess you're not cut out for family life," he'd say, smirking as Mom nodded absently. Dad never corrected him, his eyes fixed on his phone, tacitly endorsing every word. The tension wasn't new, but it had grown sharper since I moved back. After my marriage collapsed, I had nowhere else to go. My marketing job paid well, but Grand Rapids' rising rents and my ex's legal fees left me strapped. Moving in was supposed to be temporary, a few months to regroup. 6 months later, I was still there, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded posters and the weight of their expectations. Every paycheck I handed over felt like a tax for existing, a fee for the privilege of being judged. I wasn't blameless. I could have said no, set boundaries, walked away. But guilt kept me tethered. Mom's health, Dad's failures, Scott's aimlessness, they were my responsibility. Or so I'd been taught. Family came first, even when it meant carrying their burdens while they mocked mine. I'd bite my tongue when Scott sneered, swallow my anger when Mom deflected, and ignore Dad's dismissive grunts. But each slight built pressure like water straining against a dam. The house itself seemed to amplify the strain. The kitchen where we ate in near silence was a battleground of unspoken grudges. The living room cluttered with Mom's medical supplies, and Dad's old business books felt like a museum of their failures. Scott's music drifted up from the basement, a constant reminder of his freeloading. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd become the villain in their story. They didn't see my sacrifices, only my failure to stay married. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the way they weaponized my pain. Scott's taunts weren't just cruel, they were calculated, designed to keep me small. Mom's gentle chiding framed as concern cut deeper, because it came from love. Dad's indifference was its own kind of betrayal, a refusal to defend me. I'd spent years proving my worth, but to them, I was just the daughter who'd messed up her life. Still, I sensed a shift. The more they pushed, the less I cared about their approval. I started noticing things: Scott's new headphones, Mom's brand name prescriptions, Dad's mysterious investments. Where was my money going? I didn't ask, not yet, but the question gnawed at me. I was tired of being their scapegoat, tired of paying for their respect. Something had to give, and I was starting to realize it might be me who'd make it happen. By the time our annual BBQ arrived, I already knew someone would turn the heat higher. It just turned out to be me. That evening, the BBQ smoke still lingered in the backyard, but the air was heavier with something else: resentment. My brother Scott stood by the picnic table, beer in hand, his smirk sharper than ever. The family gathering, a so-called tradition, had drawn neighbors and cousins, but it felt like a stage for his cruelty. He raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, Chelsea, still flying solo? No husband, no kids, just you and your empty life." Laughter erupted. My mother Janet giggled nervously, her eyes darting away. My father Edward let out a low chuckle, his face half hidden behind a burger. The crowd's amusement burned, but their betrayal cut deeper. I'd endured Scott's jabs for months, swallowed their judgment to keep the peace. But that night, something broke. I stepped forward, my pulse pounding, and locked eyes with him. "Where's your money, Scott?" "Oh, wait, I've been paying for you all." "But that ends today." The words sliced through the chatter. His smirk faltered, and the yard fell silent, save for a neighbor's awkward cough. I didn't stop. "I'm done paying for everyone," I declared, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Mom's jaw dropped, her napkin fluttering to the ground. Dad's eyes narrowed, his burger forgotten. The cousins exchanged glances, sensing a storm. Scott recovered quickly, his face twisting with indignation. "You're calling us freeloaders? That's rich coming from someone who can't even keep a marriage." His accusation stung, but I held my ground. Mom jumped in, her tone pleading. "Chelsea, honey, let's not ruin the night. We're family, you know we need you." Her words, meant to soothe, only fueled my anger. She wasn't defending me. She was protecting the status quo. Dad said nothing, but his glare was a warning, cold and unyielding. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some slipping away to avoid the fallout. The tension was suffocating, like a rope tightening around us all. I'd spent years playing the dutiful daughter, footing their bills while they mocked my pain. But saying it out loud, declaring my refusal, felt like shedding a weight I hadn't known I carried. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes, not just shock. They relied on me, and I'd just pulled the rug out from under them. Scott's voice rose, his finger jabbing the air. "You think you're better than us? You'd let Mom go without her meds." His words were a low blow, twisting my resolve into guilt. Mom clutched her chest, her face pale, murmuring about her health. Dad's silence grew heavier, his stare boring into me like I'd betrayed some unspoken code. I wanted to scream, to list every sacrifice, every paycheck, every sleepless night. But I didn't. Their reactions, raw and desperate, showed they knew the truth. I wasn't just their bank. I was their scapegoat, and I dared to fight back. The crowd had thinned, leaving only family and a few stragglers. A cousin tried to lighten the mood, cracking a joke about the burgers, but it landed flat. The night was ruined, and I didn't care. Breaking my silence wasn't just defiance, it was clarity. I saw them for what they were: people who'd taken my loyalty and spat on it. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Mom's trembling hands, Scott's flushed anger, Dad's icy disapproval, they pressed against me, a reminder of the family I still loved despite everything. I'd grown up idolizing them, believing family was unbreakable. Now, standing in that backyard, I realized love didn't mean surrender. Their dependence wasn't my duty. It was their choice. The realization didn't erase the hurt, but it sharpened my resolve. I couldn't keep living for their approval, bankrolling their lives while they belittled mine. Scott stormed off, muttering curses, his beer can crunching underfoot. Mom followed, whispering apologies to guests, her voice shaky. Dad stayed, his eyes never leaving me, as if waiting for me to crack. I didn't. The weight of their judgment was still there, but it was lighter now, overshadowed by a spark of freedom. I'd spoken my truth, and there was no going back. But words alone wouldn't change anything. Their anger, their denial, told me they'd fight to keep me in line. I needed more than an outburst to break free. As I stood there, their voices ringing, I knew words wouldn't be enough. I had to act. Later that night, I logged in just to see how bad things had gotten and realized $60,000 had vanished like smoke. My laptop screen glowed in the dimness of my childhood bedroom, each transaction a punch to the gut. Unauthorized charges, ATM withdrawals, online purchases. My account was a graveyard of my trust. I'd funneled every paycheck into this family, believing it was my duty, but the numbers didn't lie. They'd been siphoning my money not just for necessities, but for luxuries I'd never seen. My hands shook as I canceled the recurring transfers to their accounts, severing the financial lifeline I'd provided for years. The confirmation email felt like a declaration of war. The next morning, the fallout began. My brother Scott cornered me in the kitchen, his face red with fury. "You cut us off? You're tearing this family apart," he shouted, slamming a mug on the counter. His words echoed his earlier accusations, but now they carried a desperate edge. He wasn't just angry, he was scared. I stood firm, my voice calm but unyielding. "I'm not your ATM anymore, Scott. Figure it out." His eyes widened as if my defiance was a foreign language. He'd always relied on my compliance, but that version of me was gone. Mom entered, her hands trembling, clutching a bottle of insulin like a prop. "Chelsea, how could you do this to me?" she pleaded, her voice breaking. "My meds, my appointments. I need you. Don't punish us for one bad night." Her tears were real, but they felt like a performance, a tactic to pull me back into line. I loved her, but I saw the manipulation now. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding my sacrifice. I shook my head, refusing to buckle. "Mom, I've paid enough. It's time you all take responsibility." Dad was the last to weigh in, his presence filling the living room like a storm cloud. He didn't raise his voice, but his words cut deeper. "You think you can just walk away? It won't be that easy, Chelsea." His threat hung in the air, vague but menacing, a reminder of his ability to make my life difficult. I met his gaze, my resolve hardening. "I'm not walking away, Dad. I'm standing up." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, retreating to his recliner with a scowl. Their attacks. Scott's rage. Mom's tears. Dad's warning were a coordinated assault designed to break me. But I wouldn't bend. Alone in my room, I started digging deeper. I pulled bank statements, scrolling through months of transactions. The evidence was damning: cash withdrawals linked to Scott's Venmo medical payments, far exceeding Mom's prescriptions, and mysterious transfers to Dad's obscure investment accounts. I found text messages on my phone buried in group chats, Scott asking for a little extra for his music gear, Mom requesting funds for emergencies that never materialized, Dad's curt demands for business expenses. Each message was a thread in a web of deceit. They hadn't just used me, they'd planned it, counting on my guilt to keep me blind. The betrayal hit harder than their words. I'd given everything: my savings, my stability, because I believed family meant sacrifice. But they'd turned my loyalty into a blank check, spending my trust as freely as my money. Scott's new headphones, Mom's designer glasses, Dad's shady ventures, I saw it all now, hidden in plain sight. The house, once a refuge, felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every murmur from the living room reminded me I was surrounded by people who'd bled me dry and called it love. Isolation crept in, cold and heavy. I avoided the kitchen where Mom's sighs filled the air. I dodged the living room where Dad's glare followed me. Scott's music, once an annoyance, now sounded like a taunt blaring from the basement. I ate meals in my room, the door locked my laptop, my only companion. The silence between us wasn't peace. It was a battlefield, each side waiting for the other to crack. I missed the family I thought we were the one I'd grown up believing in. But that family didn't exist. Maybe never had. Still, I wasn't done. Their emotional barrage had shaken me, but it also fueled me. I printed bank statements, highlighted suspicious charges, and saved screenshots of their texts. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall. I was building a defense against their manipulation. I wasn't just protecting my money, I was reclaiming my life. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't about need. They'd betrayed me, not out of desperation, but out of entitlement. They thought I'd never fight back, that I'd always be their safety net. I thought about confronting them, laying out the proof then and there, but I held back. A shouting match wouldn't fix this, it would only give them more chances to twist the truth. I needed to be strategic, to gather everything before they could cover their tracks. My room, cluttered with papers and notes, became a war room. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together a case against the people I'd once trusted most. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was planning. The house grew quieter, but the tension never eased. Mom stopped knocking on my door. Scott's music played less often. Dad's footsteps echoed less frequently. They knew something was coming, even if they didn't know what. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. I felt alone, but not weak. Their betrayal had isolated me, but it had also freed me from the guilt that had kept me chained. I wasn't their daughter, their sister, their bank. I was me, and I was enough. That night, I decided to stop feeling guilty for being the only adult in the room. A week later, I brought receipts, literally. The living room in our Grand Rapids house felt like a courtroom, the air thick with accusation. My family had summoned me, their faces set in a grim tribunal. Mom sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly. Dad stood by the window, his back rigid. Scott paced, his eyes blazing with defiance. I'd spent days organizing my evidence, and now, clutching a folder of bank statements and screenshots, I was ready to turn their judgment back on them. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was my stand. I started with the numbers. $60,000, I said, holding up the highlighted statements. That's what you've taken from me without permission. Their eyes widened, but I didn't pause. I laid out the proof, charges traced to Dad's failed multi-level marketing schemes, thousands funneled into Scott's so-called music studio. You used my credit card, my savings, like it was yours, I said, my voice steady. I slid text messages across the coffee table. Scott's requests for gear money, Dad's vague demands for investments. Each piece was a nail in their defense, exposing their betrayal. Scott exploded first. You're lying, he shouted, his fist slamming the table. You gave us that money, you can't just take it back. His denial was desperate, his voice cracking under the weight of the evidence. I didn't flinch. I didn't give you anything, Scott. You stole it. His face flushed, his words stumbling into incoherent rage. Mom broke down, tears streaming as she clutched her sweater. Chelsea, how could you accuse us? We're your family. I'm sick, I needed help. Her sobs were raw, but I saw the pattern now. Her illness wasn't an excuse. It was a weapon. Dad remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. His lack of words was louder than Scott's screams, a confirmation of guilt he couldn't dodge. I pressed on, pulling out the credit card statements. You, Dad, used my card for your scams, and Scott, your studio, is just a black hole for my money. I let the papers fall, their rustle filling the quiet. This stops now. You have 30 days to pay back every cent, or I report this to the bank and the police. The ultimatum landed like a grenade. Scott froze, his mouth open. Mom's cries grew louder, her hands covering her face. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't look up. The room felt smaller, their panic pressing against me. Scott recovered enough to lash out. "You'll destroy us. You're heartless." He spat, his voice hoarse. I met his glare. "No, Scott. You destroyed my trust." Mom's pleas turned frantic. "Please, Chelsea, think about me. My health. Our home." Her words tugged at me, but I held firm. "Mom, I've thought about you for years. It's time you think about me." Dad's silence stretched, his stillness unnerving. I waited for his usual threats, but none came. His defeat was in his posture, the slump of a man caught. For the first time, I felt power, not the fleeting rush of defiance, but the steady strength of control. I'd spent years as their lifeline, their scapegoat, their bank. Now I was their reckoning. The evidence wasn't just paper, it was my voice finally heard. Their reactions, Scott's fury, Mom's tears. Dad's quiet showed they hadn't expected this. They'd banked on my guilt, my loyalty to keep me silent. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. Yet I wasn't naive. Their shock wasn't surrender. Scott's clenched fists, Mom's trembling sobs, Dad's eerie calm, they were regrouping, not retreating. I'd won this round, but the war wasn't over. Reporting them would mean legal battles, family ties severed beyond repair. The thought weighed on me not as guilt, but as reality. I loved them even now, but love didn't mean letting them ruin me. I'd given them a chance, 30 days to make it right. Whether they would was their choice, not mine. I gathered my papers, the folder heavy in my hands. 30 days, I repeated, my tone final. Scott muttered curses, storming toward the basement. Mom stayed on the couch, her cries softening into whimpers. Dad turned to the window, his back a wall of refusal. I didn't need their approval, not anymore. I'd laid bare their lies, and that was enough for now. The living room, once a place of forced togetherness, felt like a stage I'd finally left. I walked out my steps, deliberate, my heart steady but not light. This wasn't the end. Their desperation would fuel a counterattack. Excuses, manipulations, maybe worse. I'd exposed their betrayal, but they wouldn't go quietly. The next move was theirs, and I had to be ready. For years, I'd carried their burdens, believing it made me family. Now I carried only myself, and it was liberating. The evidence in my folder wasn't just proof of their theft. It was proof of my worth. I wasn't their victim, I was their equal, and they'd underestimated me. As I left the room, their silence wasn't victory. It was the calm before their storm. Kristen, my colleague and the only person who'd seen me unravel, helped me set things right and quietly plan my exit. Kristen Wade, a sharp-eyed accountant with a knack for cutting through chaos, had been my rock since my divorce. Over coffee in a Grand Rapids diner, I spilled everything: the stolen $60,000, the confrontation, the ultimatum. She didn't flinch. "We're fixing this," she said, her voice steady, and handed me the number of a bank specialist. That call started the process of untangling my name from the debts my family had racked up. The specialist, a brisk woman named Laura, walked me through freezing accounts, disputing charges, and filing claims to reclaim my credit. It wasn't quick. Paperwork piled up and phone calls dragged, but each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Back at the house, the fallout was unfolding. Without my payments, Mom, Dad, and Scott couldn't cover the rent. The landlord, fed up with their excuses, terminated the lease. Boxes started appearing in the living room, half-packed with Mom's knickknacks and Dad's old business manuals. Scott's basement corner, once cluttered with music gear, looked barren, his equipment sold off to cover debts. They were scrambling, planning to move to a cheaper place across town. I didn't gloat. Watching them pack wasn't victory, it was just consequence. For years, I'd carried their weight. Now they were learning to stand on their own or fall. I had my own plans. Kristen drove me to see apartments, her chatter about lease terms and square footage a welcome distraction. We toured a one-bedroom downtown, its big windows letting in light that felt like hope. The rent was steep, But my marketing job could handle it, especially without my family draining me. I pictured my own space, no basement strumming, no judgmental glares. Standing in the empty living room, I felt a spark of freedom, fragile but real. Kristen grinned, sensing my shift. "This is yours," she said, squeezing my arm. I nodded, my throat tight. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning around anyone else. The legal side moved faster than I expected. Laura's team at the bank flagged the unauthorized charges, Dad's multi-level marketing scam, Scott's studio splurges as fraud. They reversed what they could, slashing the debt tied to my name. I'd still lost thousands, but the relief of a cleaner slate was worth more. Kristen reviewed every document, her accountant's eye-catching details I'd missed. "You're almost free," she told me, handing me a final report. Almost? The word lingered, a reminder that freedom wasn't just financial, it was emotional, and I wasn't there yet. Kristen became my anchor. Late-night calls with her venting about Mom's tearful voicemails or Scott's angry texts kept me grounded. I'd always feared being alone, but she showed me solitude didn't have to mean loneliness. "You're enough," she'd say, her voice cutting through my doubts. She shared stories of her own battles, cutting off toxic friends, rebuilding after a bad breakup, and I saw my strength reflected in hers. With her, I wasn't the broken daughter or the family bank. I was just Chelsea, and that was enough. Meanwhile, my family's world kept crumbling. Scott's music career hit a wall when creditors came for his studio loans. He'd borrowed heavily, assuming I'd bail him out. Now he was dodging calls, his dreams buried under late notices. Dad's reputation took a harder hit. His business contacts, once drawn to his slick promises, turned cold when word spread about his shady deals. Mom tried to hold things together, but her health faltered under the stress, her doctor's visits piling up without my money to cover them. I felt a pang of guilt, but Kristen's words echoed. "You didn't cause this. They did." Packing my things was bittersweet. My childhood bedroom, once a cage, was just a room now, its faded posters no longer mocking me. I boxed up clothes, books, and a few photos, none of my family, not yet. The hurt was still too raw. Kristen helped, taping boxes and cracking jokes to keep my spirits up. "You're not just moving," she said, tossing me a roll of tape. "You're starting over." Her optimism was infectious, and I let myself believe it. The house grew emptier as my family packed their footsteps, heavy with resentment. We barely spoke, our interactions limited to curt nods or mumbled necessities. Signing the lease was a quiet triumph. The downtown apartment was mine, a blank canvas for a life I'd choose. I walked through it again alone this time, imagining furniture, plants, maybe a cat. The thought made me smile, a real smile, not the forced ones I'd worn for years. I wasn't running from my family, I was walking toward myself. The fear of being alone still lingered, but it was smaller now, overshadowed by possibility. Kristen had shown me I could build a life without their approval, and I was ready to try. My family's consequences weren't my burden anymore. Scott's debt. Dad's disgrace. Mom's struggles, they'd made their choices. I'd spent years believing family meant sacrifice, but I saw it differently now. Family wasn't about giving until you broke. It was about mutual respect, something they'd never offered. I didn't hate them. I just didn't owe them. That clarity, hard-won and fragile, was my real freedom. With the lease signed, I realized leaving wasn't just moving out, it was moving on. A month later, I unpacked boxes in my new apartment, the silence strangely kind. Back home, Scott was sorting boxes too, in a warehouse. My downtown Grand Rapids place was small, but mine, its bare walls waiting for a life I'd build. The last of my family's voicemails sat unanswered, their numbers blocked. I'd cut them off, not out of spite, but necessity. The quiet wasn't empty, it was space to breathe, to be. Meanwhile, my brother's life had shifted. He'd taken a job at a logistics hub, hauling crates to chip away at his studio debts. The music gear he'd bought with my money was gone, sold to keep creditors at bay. My parents weren't faring better. Mom and Dad had moved to a cramped apartment on the city's edge, their belongings stuffed into a one-bedroom unit. Without my income, they leaned on Social Security, scraping by on meager checks. Mom's health strained under the change her prescriptions barely covered. Dad's once proud demeanor had faded, his business schemes buried under the weight of reality. I didn't hear this from them. Neighbors' whispers and Kristen's updates filled the gaps. I felt no urge to check, no pull to fix their mess. Their consequences weren't my fault, and that truth settled in me like a stone. My world, though, was expanding. At the marketing firm, my campaign pitches caught the director's eye, landing me a promotion to senior strategist. The raise meant stability, a buffer against the financial scars my family left. I bought a couch, a coffee maker, small things that felt like anchors in my new life. My apartment became a haven, its big windows framing the city skyline. I cooked dinners, read books, even tried painting, hobbies I'd shelved to carry my family's burdens. Each choice, no matter how small, was a step toward independence, a life shaped by me, not them. The anger I'd once felt had dulled. I didn't hate Scott for his theft, or Mom for her manipulations, or Dad for his silence. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't want them in my orbit. Setting boundaries wasn't betrayal, it was survival. I'd spent years believing family meant endless giving, but I saw now that love shouldn't cost everything. Cutting contact wasn't running away, it was choosing myself. That clarity brought a calm I hadn't known, a peace that didn't need their approval. Scott's days were far from peaceful. The warehouse job was grueling, long shifts that left him too tired to dream of music. His studio debts loomed, a constant reminder of his overreach. Creditors hounded him, and without my safety net, he had no choice but to face them. I imagined him in that warehouse lifting boxes under fluorescent lights, his future narrowed by his own choices. It wasn't my burden to carry, but I couldn't help picturing it, a life he'd built, just as I was building mine. Mom and Dad's new reality was equally stark. Their apartment, from what Kristen heard, was a far cry from the spacious house we'd shared. Mom's health struggles were real, but so were her years of leaning on me instead of planning. Dad, stripped of his business bravado, was a shadow of the man who'd once intimidated me. Social Security kept them afloat, but barely. They'd relied on my money to mask their flaws, and without it, those flaws were exposed. I didn't revel in their hardship, but I didn't mourn it either. They'd had chances, years of them, and chosen to take, instead of build. My promotion gave me more than money, it gave me purpose. I led a team now, brainstorming campaigns in sleek conference rooms. My colleagues respected my ideas, a sharp contrast to the dismissal I'd faced at home. Outside work, I was finding my rhythm. I joined a book club, met neighbors, even adopted a kitten named Sage. She curled up on my couch, her purring a soft reminder that my home was mine. Kristen visited often, her laughter filling the space. She'd been right, I was enough, and I was proving it every day. The distance from my family wasn't just physical. Blocking their numbers, ignoring their attempts through mutual contacts, I'd drawn a line they couldn't cross. I didn't wonder about their days or check on their struggles. That part of me, the one that felt responsible, was gone. I'd given them everything once, and they'd squandered it. Now I was building something they couldn't touch. My apartment, my job, my life. They were mine, earned through choices they'd never understand. Scott's warehouse shifts, Mom and Dad's cramped apartment, my quiet evenings with Sage. They were parallel lives connected only by a past I'd left behind. I didn't need their apologies or their change. I needed this, a life where I answered to myself. The guilt that once gnawed at me was a memory replaced by a steady sense of rightness. Boundaries weren't walls. They were doors, ones I'd opened to a future I'd chosen. As I locked my door that night, I wasn't running from them, I was running toward me. One evening, smoke drifted from a neighbor's grill, and for a second I was back in that backyard. But this time, I didn't owe anyone anything. Standing by my apartment window in Grand Rapids, I watched the city lights flicker, the BBQ scent fading into memory. That old drama, the sting of mom's jabs, dad's cold glares, Scott's betrayal had once cut deep. Now it was just a story, one I'd survived. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned me. I'd built a life beyond it, and that was enough. Looking out, I traced the path that brought me here. I'd been the daughter who gave everything, money, time, heart, believing it proved my worth. Mom's tears, dad's demands, Scott's entitlement, they'd shaped me, but not in the way they thought. Their weight taught me to stand taller, to see that my value wasn't tied to their approval. I'd spent years carrying their burdens, thinking family meant sacrifice. But family isn't a debt you pay with your soul. It's a bond, not a chain, and I'd learned to let go. The BBQ smoke stirred a faint echo of that summer night when their words had shattered something in me. But instead of anger, I felt clarity. I didn't need to relive their chaos or prove them wrong. I'd already won, not by fighting them, but by choosing myself. My apartment with its cozy couch and Sage's soft purrs was proof. My promotion, my book club, my quiet evenings, they were mine, built without their validation. I wasn't the failure they'd mocked. I was. Enough always had been. Kristen's voice echoed in my mind, her words a lifeline through the worst of it. She'd seen me at my lowest, yet never doubted I'd rise. Her belief, steady and unflinching, showed me what support could be. I thought of Mom, her pleas masking manipulation, Dad, his silence a weapon, Scott, his dreams built on my losses. They weren't my story anymore. I'd written a new one, line by line, choice by choice. The BBQ scent wasn't a trigger, it was a reminder of how far I'd come. Self-worth is non-negotiable. That's the lesson I carry now. For years, I let their needs define me, believing I had to earn my place. But worth isn't something you prove, it's something you claim. Setting boundaries wasn't just cutting contact. It was declaring I deserved better. I didn't need their love to be whole. I needed my own. And in choosing that, I found freedom, not the loud kind, but the quiet strength of knowing I could stand alone and still be enough. I turned from the window, the city's hum a soft backdrop. My life wasn't perfect. Bills piled up, work stressed me out, and some nights I missed the family I'd hoped we could be. But those moments didn't break me. They reminded me why I'd fought for a life where I answered to myself. I'd lost $60,000, years of trust, but I'd gained something priceless, me. That trade, painful as it was worth it. This journey taught me that freedom starts with a choice to value yourself even when others don't. It's not easy. Doubt creeps in, guilt lingers, and the world tells you to keep giving. But you're not a bank or a punching bag or a shadow. You're a person, and your worth doesn't bend to anyone's demands. I learned that the hard way through tears and sleepless nights, but I'm stronger for it. And if I can do it, so can you. I'm not here to tell you to cut off your family or walk away from everyone. I'm saying, know your worth and don't let anyone cheapen it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to a life where you thrive. Mine led me here, to this apartment, this view, this peace. Yours might look different, but they're just as vital. You deserve a life where you're not just surviving, but living fully, freely as you. Have you ever set a boundary that changed your life? Share your story below.